Hey everyone, it's Louisa Tanner Munson, and I'm really excited because today I'm going back to kind of where it all started. I'm going to introduce Mr. M, my husband. Now, for those of you that don't know, this is the Great Realization series, which is
What?
about the Great Realization series. Did you not know?
Oh, no. Okay.
What
Yeah,
did
I
you
did.
think? Okay.
Go on.
So the idea of this is to sort of examine our thoughts and what's been going on for us during these times of great pause, uncertainty, unraveling, awakening, and realizations. So it seemed only fitting that the person that kind of got me into videos and podcasting and going public and doing recordings should be on this, because in our story, I contacted you to see if you wanted a presenter for your show, didn't I? In your new age show on the Barefoot Broadcast all those years ago. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to my husband, Mr. Carl Munson. So, Carl, tell me a little bit about why I'm interviewing you right now. Why do you think you've got something to add to this thing?
Oh, I
This thing
see.
about realizations.
Because, as people keep saying, this is an unprecedented time, and it amounts to no. Well, it is. I mean, that's why people keep saying it. I mean, it is a bit of a, like with all cliches, the
Mm,
hackneyed phrases. Their overuse sickens people, but there's a grain of truth in it, and the grain of truth is that there is no precedent really for how we are at the moment. There are some historical recollections. So I was just seeing on TV that 20 million people are out of work in the United States, and the precedent they're relating to there, as in precedent, not president, but precedent, is the Great Depression,
mhm.
which isn't in anyone's. Well, can there be anyone alive from? Yeah, I guess there are still some few people alive from them, but no one really, I don't think, will remember it in their active memory. And it's a historical bogeyman, isn't it, of a terrible time when there was no work and people were starving and all that sort of stuff. And we have that spectre upon us in any kind of society that's anything like that. And the what's brought that on is the coronavirus at the heart of it, but then really the effects of the effects of the effects of the virus, and
Mm.
that's what we're dealing with. Those are like the waves, I think, of the coronavirus, seas that are washing over us, or like, if only as little waves they are affecting us, but for a lot of people they're turning into quite unmanageable waves, aren't they? People are being overwhelmed by the
Mm.
scale and size of some of the waves that are emanating from what we identify as the kind of epicenter of our current world ills, which is the coronavirus and its associated collective phenomenon. And that's brought about what people are calling the Great Realization, or the Great Pause, or the Great Unraveling, which some people saw coming, but I don't think many thought it was coming in this, or caused by a virus. Some suspected it, and some suspect that others caused it even. But whatever happens, whatever your theory is about how it came about, we are living in a dominant culture with some dominant ideas and effects that are affecting us all who are living in that collective. And our
Yeah.
job now is to respond to them as each of us sees fit, in a way that we weren't called to before. It was quite theoretical before, wasn't it? Like, what would you do in an unraveling? Well, I would do this, that, and the other. And it's different now, because what are you going to do now? The great unraveling, the great pause, the great realization time is here. Like, not
Mhm.
what would you do, but what are you going to do? Because it is upon us, I think.
Well, yeah, we have to actually decide, don't we? Um, yeah, I like the cut of your jib there. Um, yeah, you seem very collected in it, and I guess you've had time to think about it quite a bit, haven't you? Really, because um, like your work has evolved quite a bit since the start of this corona phenomenon. Do you want to explain a little about how you think your role has developed during this time, or like why did you do it? You know, why are you doing what you're doing right now?
Well, as in the Good Morning Portugal service, or how I'm.
All of your services, because I think they all kind of like tie in with um, your need to um, kind of help and be of service.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much of that is like a sort of dysfunctional winning formula kind of, neurotic response, that, the way I am acceptable as a person and I feel I should respond is to be of help. There might be something of that in it, but anyway, still good things can come of something like that. And
Yeah.
the, what occurs to me from what you've asked me is that um, things are coming together, and they're not. And I don't think we can afford to be kind of distracted and unfocused in the slack times, can't we? In the luxurious times, because there's capacity and kind of ease to kind of allow for all of that. But when it gets a bit sharper and pointed like it is at the moment, I think that's causing us to be a bit more focused and responsive, and live more on our wits and instincts in the way that animals do.
Mm.
Animals now kind of eat when they're, animals always have kind of eaten when they're hungry, uh, struck back if they're being attacked. And I think the human animal is probably a bit more in that condition now as well. We're not in the luxury of thinking about things and considering things and not having to respond. A lot of people are really having to respond to the circumstances that they find themselves in. And, we're no different. And who knows how much more acute that will become. But I, yeah, I mean, for Good Morning Portugal, I thought it would be useful to share an update for people who didn't speak Portuguese, who live in Portugal,
Hmm.
and try and be as factual as possible with my opening part of the live stream each, Monday to Friday morning daily show, and tell people what's going on as a reference point, and a reliable and regular reference point. But actually, my agenda beyond that is thinking collectively how a small number of us might want to and are responding. Because I
Yeah.
think actually this is going to be devastating. I think this is, to what we know. Um, on the one hand, like I say, about the field opposite us, that lovely meadow, that field over the road. Take a
Mm.
photo of it now. Take a photo of it a year ago, and ask someone to say when the photo was taken. And you
Yeah.
wouldn't know from nature, would you? Pure nature, you would not know when it was, if it was May 2020, May 2019, or May 2030. It will look the same. But human life looks very different uh, a year ago,
Mm.
and to how it looks now, and I dare say how it will look in 10 years' time. And I think we're approaching a time that will be like 2008 or worse. Um, and I don't need to say much about all the hardship and difficulty and austerity that came from 2008. But what's interesting about 2008 is also seen as what precipitated Bitcoin and people's understanding of the blockchain. So great
Mm.
things can come.
Yeah.
Necessity is the mother of invention, and good things will come. And yeah, to go back to my prognosis rather than diagnosis with what's happening to us, and us being in Portugal, I suspect it will get like it was in 2008. The the kind of the safe bet, the religion of capitalism, in which everybody had their faith that if they did the right things, it's actually quite a good metaphor. It is a religion, I think, neoliberal capitalism. It's like if you do your rituals and you believe and you do the right things, you will have a place in heaven. Except for capitalism, if you do all the right things and work hard, you'll be rewarded and you'll survive. And
Mm.
that is falling apart because it's not true. It wasn't really true for most
Never
people.
true, is it really? It was based on what, a giant pyramid scheme.
Hmm.
The early
It was
adopters.
true enough. It was true enough for enough people for it to keep going, and that's probably how religions work as well. Because once religions don't satisfy enough people, they fall apart, don't they? And but I think this one, the religion of neoliberal capitalism, and the old system, the thing that a lot of people want to go back to. Americans, you see Americans demanding to go back to normality. Um, I think the longer it goes on as being disruptive, the harder it will go back to being normal. And if people do manage to go back to normal, it will still remain unsatisfying and unfulfilling. So I've no interest in. I never was that interested in it in the first place. I just found myself, born into it, and
Yeah.
endeavouring to make sense of it and make a success of it, so-called success of it. And I would much rather be part of something new and different. Always have done. That's where, when we met, what the Barefoot Broadcast was about. Other
Mm.
things, most things I've been involved in my life have been about what's possible rather than what's actual. And now here we
About that.
are. We're in a situation where what's possible could become actual,
Mm.
because so much of what all the hippies and alternative people were going on about over the last 10, 20, 30, 50 years, even a lot of it's much more attractive to people and makes more sense. And not just sense, but like it almost presents itself as a necessity for our human sustainability. It's just that those early canaries in the coal mine didn't have enough traction or subscription or whatever you'd call it. But
Mm.
a lot of people can see it now. A lot of people can see that we can't carry on the way we were, and it might be more attractive and fulfilling to live in a less intense and more appropriate and natural way.
Mm. You mentioned, that when we met, you were doing the Barefoot Broadcast, but obviously, I know a little bit about your past, and you've had kind of a life.
Really?
You've known, you've had a kind of like lifelong obsession with living a good life, or living clean, or finding, some kind of spiritual, not awakening, but deep joy is what you've been searching for, I think. But I noticed
Mm.
that your desire for the involvement in those kinds of movements has kind of gone like, when you were in your thriving years, and I don't mean to say that you're not in your thriving years, but those years of
Charming.
thrust in your like late 20s and early 30s, when people are
Mm.
traditionally really thrusty, you were setting up the Institute of Joy and writing books and this, that, and the other.
Oh, being a wanker, basically. I mean, you know, I would describe those times. I was doing my best,
Yeah.
but I think the arc, the trajectory of all realization, if it is that, and that sounds wanky, but is evangelical upon
Yeah.
discovery. You know, when you
Mm.
when you when you feel like you know something that other people don't, you can become a very annoying person, especially if you think what you think is right for other people. And
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an alternative. It's just a phase people go through, and we're all aware of it, aren't we? From religious, born again, religious associations, friends, network marketing, the woke movement, politically woke people. When they start getting into that, there's a lot of merit in them
Mm.
wanting to transform what they might see as the error of their ways and the error of everybody else's way and the error of society. So you can understand why people get very excited and quite annoying in their wish to convert other people. That only lasts a certain amount of time with any luck, and you kind of, I suppose, absorb and embed what might be in any way nutritious from that, and
Mm.
the rest gets like vitamin C, the metaphor I'm reaching for here. What isn't needed gets
Flushed away.
processed and let go of. What might
Really?
be useful gets taken on board, and over time, that I'm listening to John Butler quite a lot, the old mystic
Tell,
from
tell me,
Derbyshire.
tell me about John Butler.
Well, I mentioned him because he I imagine went through all these phases, of what he saw as his awakening and his normal life, and then his extraordinary life, and now he's just an old man. Not just an old man. I mean, he's an old man, but he is humbled by life, and
Mm.
he's very different to Brian Rose and David Icke. He laughs a lot, and he sees the error of his ways and the folly of humanity, and also shares what there is of true love and joy in God and stillness and peace that's available, that's been hard won by him over his decades of life and experience. And he sees how you can access that, and he does. It looks like he does access that, and he's a beacon of it. He shares that back and sees how we're all the rest of us are crazily going about our business, especially all the younger ones, and the pressure people are under now that they were under, and how that's intensified. And he has some level of enlightenment and freedom that he speaks of and answers questions about. And I think that's the course of it. That it takes place in time. And yeah, so to answer your question about how I have been, or what I've thought about things before, it's just part of a process, and I just hope to become increasingly less wanky as my life progresses, for
Yeah.
want of a better way of putting it.
And it's finding that balance, right? Because like we could become, to use your words, we could become increasingly less wanky as you and I age. And we also need to make a living and ensure our own security, and kind of
Yes.
ease the way for our children as well. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the kind of it's our desperate need for financial security, or I say financial security because that's where we think it's at, but it's our need for security that kind of propels us into the wankiness.
Well,
When we sell our wares, when we put ourselves out to market, when we find ourselves in a world where there might be competition, is that not where this kind of wankiness comes from, to use your word?
partly, I think people, compromise and prostitute themselves on the one hand to make a living because it's fear-based, and I'm not criticizing that. We all know about that, don't we? We know that we made compromises to survive, and
Mm,
that in its own way has its own attraction and credibility, as awkward and difficult and unpleasant as that is as well. On the one hand, it's kind of noble in a way, isn't it, that we are prepared to compromise something in order to survive, and have our families and children survive. That's one way of doing it, and that's easy to criticize from the sort of condition I was more in, which was like to not be bothered about making a living,
mm,
in order to prove my point or not compromise myself. And I don't think either is better than the other with that. It's not big or clever to be poor voluntarily, any more than it is to be, compromising yourself. In fact, it's probably worse, isn't it? Spiritual correctness and holy poverty, conscious holy poverty, is pretty narcissistic, and guilty as charged. I've been there and done that, but I also forgive myself because I was doing my best, and I didn't know any better. But I do now. What else can I do apart from not think that was so great? But I would not. It wouldn't be helpful for me to stay in a constant state of regret and self disgust about that. But I do.
yeah.
I can recognize it. If that answers what you were saying, it is just. I mean, it is just human to be a bit off and compromised, and that's what this human process is about in many ways, isn't it? We can all forgive each other. I just watched, you were working and left me watching a movie called Beautiful Boy, which is the story of really a father and son, and the son's drug addiction, and it, the drug addict son is dealing with his pain, and the dad is as well, and the kid's using drugs to escape the human condition, and his dad is, and the mum and dad are suffering all the pain of their experience of the human condition through their son, and it's just tragic, and it's just very common as well. It's like, it's horrible. The film's point is that there are so many people, the leading cause of death, that's what you discover in the film, is that the leading cause of death for under 50s is drug overdoses, I think, in America. And that is people en masse are trying to deal with their being humans effectively, isn't it? And that's an awful outcome, and it is so us as well, isn't it, as human beings? It's kind of predictable, and it's tragic, and we keep going, and we hope to find better ways. That might be one of the great realizations, mightn't it? That we are. I think we are beginning to understand that, aren't we? We're beginning to understand why we behave because of our pain, past pain, and beginning to understand the crazy stuff we do because of that pain. And in that understanding, maybe we won't do so much of that. That could be a great realization, couldn't it? And that's what I'm thankful for with this great pause realization. Is it's like we've joked about this, but we run on a retreat, and it's in retreat where you see yourself. You come under your scrutiny, don't you? Your self-consciousness is more evident than when you're running around all over the place, living a so-called normal life, and that's what people want to get back to. Now, some people can't wait to stop being under their own scrutiny and their own stillness, and then for others it might be a welcome point to a point. I'm very well aware of my limitations. On the one hand, it's lovely to spend a lot of time with our children, but then to see what an impatient, terrible old bastard I am whilst I am spending a lot of time with my children. The two things come together, don't they? And that's what you see in retreat. You see yourself struggling, and then you get the chance to think, okay, well, I'll go back to work now because I can't bear that. Or, okay, I could do something about that, and I'll have another day tomorrow to be less impatient, which is what this extended lockdown is giving us, isn't it? It's another day of practice, of mindfulness. And because this is what everybody wanted, or not everybody, a lot of people wanted what they've been given now, right? They wanted less stress. They wanted, or what they've ended up with is a different kind of stress, I suppose. But it's like, we need a break. We want to spend more time with our families. We want mindfulness. We want to eat properly. We don't want to eat so much crap. And it's like the universe, or whatever it is, life has said, well, there you go. You're on a mindfulness retreat now of 7 weeks so far. You don't have to. You can't go out and eat loads of junk food like you didn't want to do. You can't be spending money to ease your pain, because that's not allowed either. This is a really good retreat for you, and it's free of charge. And people are finding out, aren't they, if they're up for that, or up to it, or not, or it's like, for God's sake, let me just get back to work. Enough already. And each to their own with that. I can only speak of what I think I'm seeing in it, and what I suspect others may or may not be seeing. But only someone hearing that would be able to tell me how it is for them in that regard.
Well, you answered my last question anyway, which is surprising given that you're a broadcaster. You saw that coming a mile off. Yes, and my great realization is this. If your old pal, what's his name? John Butler.
John Butler, yeah.
The guy that you're listening to, what do you think his great realization would be for humanity right now? What would his advice be?
Well, I can only guess, obviously. I think, well, from what I've seen, my impression of what his message is about the times we're in is that the what we're up against is nothing new in essence. It's
Mm.
wearing different clothes, but it's the time old battle, I suppose, in a way, or contest of our divine nature and our worldly human, grosser nature, if you like, and the interplay between the two. And the circumstances are allowing us to see which we really want to be and associate with or develop into. Because,
Mm.
he one of the things he said, I think, is like I was referring to before, it takes time. He has young people say, how do I get to be like you, John? And the only answer he can really give, I think, is like, well, give it 60 years. And you might, that I'm very fond of the teacher Barry Long. And
Yeah.
he was the same. I hated, when I first was reading Barry Long and listening to his cassettes. That's how long I've been following Barry Long. I would listen. He had cassettes,
Yeah.
and that was 30 years ago, I think. And I remember at that time, he would say, "You have to live your life, and it takes time." And I just didn't want to hear that. I wanted to be realized and enlightened and free in my
Mm.
20s because I got, for some reason, I had a sense of it then, but I was so disappointed to hear that it takes time and it might not happen until, I was in my 50s, 60s, or 70s until I could really embody and feel it and be aware of it. I can
Mm.
smell it much better now, like baking bread, at the other end of the house. If I
Yeah.
may be so sort of arrogant as to say that, but certainly it's more in my realization and experience than it was when I was 20, for sure. It was a lot more conceptual and more of a yearning and longing in those days. And I can see it in my sights now, even though I still clearly need loads more practice. And another day, life saying, well, here's another day to practice what you didn't get quite right yesterday. And then it's like, actually, I think I'm going to need a few more days the way it's going, or months or years, But that's along those lines, I think, is what he talks about, and what he might be saying now is, where are we at? Are you in your divine nature, more or less? Or, well, I don't know, it isn't that really, but that's the proposition. That's
Mm.
what I would, that's, that's what I think he's saying. That's what I think. I don't think that's what he's saying. That's what I think he's saying. And that's what I'm saying as well, is that's our choice, is to realize more of our divine nature, which is timeless, free, and unburdened by all the difficulties. Because it would have to be, that to me is what liberation and enlightenment is about. And then there is where we are before we're that, which is where most of us are most of the time, I think, and that's what this existence is about. And the practice is there for us, and that that we have been delivered. And that, it does sound pompous, doesn't it? Because there are many people really struggling and really suffering, clearly, with what's going
Mm.
on in the world at the moment. But nonetheless, the opportunity's been delivered to all of us to broaden ourselves and realize that divinity in the most extreme of circumstances.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in all sorts of ways. I'm making it sound like quite an intellectual thing, but actually, it can happen in a really visceral way as well, can't it? Like when people think they're going to die, they do
Yeah.
become very awake and enlightened. For one example, in battle, if you like, or in the face of terrible things, or if you're suddenly bereaved, the shock space of that is in
Mhm.
its way when the grief drops away for a moment. you can feel very free in a state of bereavement, and divine almost. You get a sense of the divine because you're maybe so close to it by proxy. Or at the other end of the spectrum, when what it's like to be in the presence of newly birthed beings, you get a jump start from them, don't you, in timelessness and the immortal and so on for a moment, until they become really annoying and demanding.
When all three of ours have been small, in the early few months of breastfeeding with them, the hormone load for me has been such that I actually feel like I'm going to faint and like drift off. I feel like I'm having an out of body experience. It's quite divine, and I can only ever liken it to when I've gone into a deep meditative state through singing, through chanting, and I felt myself almost like leave my body. There is that sense of timelessness. Okay, well, on that bombshell, I just wanted to thank you for your time tonight.
Well, on that, can I add on that note? One of my favourite pictures that I've had for a very long time is that Picasso rendition, is it called, of a mother and child. It's his blue period, is it? Where
it's here. Hang on. 1 sec, I'll get it.
Oh, okay. I'm most unaccustomed to having dead air around me, but I'll resist the urge to fill the space.
It's just hanging on our wall. How cool is that?
Yeah, that's the picture. Now that, I think in its time would have been, sorry, I might have covered up my microphone now. That in its time would have been a pretty shocking picture, because she is not a classical beauty, is she? She's quite cubey and large, and not what you might expect from a portrayal of the Madonna and Child. But I think she has an indifference about her, doesn't she?
Yeah, I was going to say she's kind of indifferent and a little bit fed up holding her child, like.
Yes.
But I can also relate to that, because it is also a bit boring at times, and also time boringness of it. And it's special too. Like, when you have those feelings of this is a bit boring, you also remind yourself that this too shall pass, and you need to appreciate it. Like today was the first time our daughter hasn't had any milk since she was born. In the mornings, and she's 4 years old now, and so that marks a kind of separation. These things do happen, don't they? We need to appreciate we've got while we've got it, I guess.
Yes, and the mundanity of the extraordinary, of the divine. I think that's what that picture's about. And you just don't know. I think when someone else might be in revelation or ecstasy, because actually on the surface it may look really mundane and indifferent.
Yeah.
And I think the real action is taking place inside and beneath the surface. And I think that's my interpretation of Picasso's work there. And I think that's why, a lot of sort of religious pictures, we've got other pictures of Madonnas and children in our house, haven't we, that we've kind of inherited. And you might think on the one hand are sort of portrayals of the glory of Christ, which they are. But when his mum's there as well, there's something about the what's really special, I think, for the nursing mum of a baby is the thing you've just described. I can relate to it, from my own, not from my own experience.
I was just about to say.
Yeah, but I can, but isn't it funny how I can relate to it in a funny sort of way, or how I project that onto it? I suppose that's more accurate. I'm projecting, an ecstatic peace that comes from the connection to the divine baby. And isn't a lovely thing that they're all divine babies, and that we're all divine babies, or were once, and that divine newness is still in us at the moment, to be realized and available to us at any moment. And the mundanity and boringness of lockdown could actually allow that to happen. You know, that's incredible, and it may or may not happen at any given moment.
Wow. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Nice microphone, nice setup you've got there.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your help.
Okay.
Right. Well, yeah, thank you so much. If anyone actually does listen to this, because we've had no live listeners, mind you, this is midnight. But you know, if anyone listens to this, it's going to be posted to YouTube, Facebook, and also to Spotify. And if you found, you know, a certain amount of comfort from it, and you want to reach out to Carl, how can people reach you, love? Do you want people to reach out to you?
Yeah, well, sure. Carl@carlmunson.com is my email address. I'd be very flattered if anyone sent me a message. It would do my still present and demanding attention-seeking ego a lot of good to receive any feedback from the performance I've just given.
Well, actually, I think you've been really good. It's interesting because, you know, sometimes we go through those periods of thinking, you know, what kind of job should I do? Or, you know, what am I here for? What am I supposed to be doing? What's my purpose in life and stuff? Listening to you talk, you've got the kind of reverence for life, and a way of explaining it in such beautiful terms that I would imagine a pastor or a vicar or, you know, some kind of, I wouldn't want to say a religious leader necessarily, but, you know, like the friendly elder that you need, you know, the person that is there during your formative times, that the person that everybody needs, you know, a guide by the side. You know, you have the right kind of countenance. I know actually that you do want to be an elder in the community, don't you? And that sounds so boring.
Well, you know, I don't think I've got any choice in becoming older. Whether or not I become an elder is not for me to decide, but I will do my best to earn that accolade.
Wow.
But it's not my. This is the greatest jobs I think are given to you. They're not what you decide you're doing. All the great vocations, you know, the callings, if you like, you don't call yourself, do you? You're called by life or by other people to be there in that role. And so if that's how it is, then so be it. I just wanted to make a terrible pasta joke. That I know that, well, a local Lidl is short of pasta, so that I can always fill in down there if necessary.
I tell you what, I'm going to leave you to your brandy.
And my dad jokes. Okay.
Yeah, I'll leave your dad jokes behind.
That's the thing. Becoming an elder, they'll have to become granddad jokes, won't they, rather than dad jokes?
Yeah. Okie dokes. Right. Well, thanks anyone for, you know, if you listen. Thank you, Carl, for joining me. You know, this is a time.
Jesus, if you've got this far, you know, 38 minutes into this, you deserve a medal anyway. So respect to you.
Thank you for ruining my series.
You know,
anyway.
Well, no. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad or anything. I'm just saying that, you know, it's specialist. It's very niche, isn't it? And it just reminds me of the that great feedback. You know, one of the great things I remember from the Barefoot Broadcast days is that we had a listener who used to just send us a little message saying, "The rats are throwing themselves on the traps, Carl." I recently unfriended him.
Oh, I think I know who it was. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Well, everyone, we're over and out now in Portugal, right? Let's say goodnight.
Yep.
Well,
good night.
Bye for now.
Boa noite.
Boa noite.